Last one for this lovely 3-lesson set of videos. We have an interest problem. So there's a couple of money problems in there that are dealing with like price per object or people's hourly rates. Focus on what does this mean in terms of an equation? What is it telling me to do? And if you can find the two equations, then you can solve. So feel free to stop on by if you need help figuring out those equations, because that is the most complex part that people get really frustrated with. All right, so we have $6,000, whew, I wish, being invested for 5 years with a total return of $1,080 only in Mathland. Part of the money is invested in a fund that returns the equivalent of 2% simple interest. The rest of the money is invested at 4% simple interest. Determine the amount of us invested in each account. There must have been a limit on the 4% account because we should have just put all $6,000 in the 4%. It's more money. Simple interest, though, is the principal times the rate as a decimal times the time in years, usually, is equal to the interest that is accrued, or the interest earned, which in this case is, when they say return, they mean the interest, because you notice 1080 is less than 6,000. So that's just the interest, not the interest plus the principal. All right. So there's our formula. Let's set up like so. And they give us two totals. The total amount I have to play around and invest with, and the total return or interest. Totals are where you get your equation. So that is going to be one equation. That is going to be the other. In the past, we used the 6,000 to fill in something in each row and then worked over here and got the equation from the interest. Here, we're just making that step more explicit. Although honestly, that's the way I kind of taught it at the beginning, because I just really don't like writing only one variable. All right, so what they asked for is determine the amount invested in each account. So the amount invested is the principal. So these are my two things. And in this case, I can't really call them 2 and 4, so we'll go with X and Y. But this is why the answers, like when you're typing on Alex, it will say blank amount is invested in the 2% account. So that way, you know, even if you called these the other way around, if I wrote 4% and 2%, whichever one is on the line with 2%, that's the number you're going to put in. Now, what about our time? This gets ninja'd in there. 5 years. Now here they actually wrote it with a number and with an abbreviation, so it's more obvious. I have seen problems write FIVE space YEARS. They just put it as words and people will gloss right over it because it's not a numeral number. All right. So to figure out the interest on the first account, I would do the amount of money I'm investing times 0.02 times 5, which will be 0.1x. Then 4% times 5 times y, 0.04 times 5 will be 0.2y. And there we have our two equations. The first one, x plus y equals $6,000. The second one, 0.1x plus 0.2y equals 1080. Now we could pretty straightforward solve both of these for y, throw them on the graphing calculator, figure out where they cross. I could take the first equation, solve it for y, or solve it for x. But since I'm feeling puckish, I'm going to use the elimination method. And I'm going to be really weird. I'm actually just going to multiply the first equation by negative 0.1. Now, like I said, there are multiple ways to do it. But negative 0.1 times x will be negative 0.1x. Negative 0.1 times y will be negative 0.1y. So that's the other reason why I can kind of get away with it here, because the x and the y didn't have a coefficient, so it just becomes whatever number I chose. And then 6,000 is a huge multiple of 10, so multiplying it by, it'll be negative, and then 1/10 would be 600. Then we have the positive 0.1x. The positive 0.2y is equal to 1080. So this gives us positive 0.1. 0.2 minus 0.1 would be 0.1y, and 480. So 0.1, if I divide by 0.1, that is actually the same as multiplying by 10. So y is $4,800. Because remember, that's in our principal, so that is our money. So we have $4,800. And then the leftover to get to 6,000 would be 1,200. 2 plus 8 is 10, carry a 1, 4, 5, 6, 6,000. So it adds. And then if I crunch it back in, 1,200 times 0.1 is 120. 480 times 0.2 is double 480, which is 960. 960 plus 120 is 1,080. So it checks. So there is our crash course reminder in the simple interest. Again, please bring your questions to me. I sit around during office hours pretty bored. All right.